We are shocked at the misuse of Hitler and the Nazi regime in this time in our state's history. I have to say, as the Jewish community, this comparison is never to be used in any other situation other than speaking about what happened in World War II.
The Minnesota for Marriage spokesperson claimed that they issued an apology that no one as of yet has seen or heard. There was no evidence or recording of this apology. Additionally, the campaign made it clear that they stand behind the underlying sentiments of what was said. In all of the back and forth in the media yesterday, we did not hear an apology from Pastor Brandon, or from the person who approved it, or from Minnesota for Marriage. Minnesotans deserve it. Let's hear an apology. What's more, in these stories, Minnesota for Marriage characterized these incidents as being off message, as if Pastor Brandon sort of slipped off the track a little bit and did not represent the official message of the campaign. But the video that we all saw yesterday was taken in Brainerd on October 16th. And we know that the communications director for Minnesota for Marriage had participated in the presentation 5 days before that. He had a chance to stop it, and yet he didn't. Why? This is much more than a poor analogy. The entire premise of the analogy used in this presentation is a lie. Religious freedom will not be threatened by defeating this amendment. Over 200 communities of faith and over 500 clergy and religious leaders have come out in opposition to this amendment and are working to facilitate respectful and honest conversations with Minnesotans. And we're here today because we're having thoughtful conversations with Minnesotans on this issue. That's what we're trying to do. To see Minnesota for Marriage make this comparison is a detriment to the conversation that we're trying to have and that we as Minnesotans need to have. But now we're left with more questions. More questions than we have answers. And I think the people of Minnesota deserve the truth. If this is not an official campaign message, then why did Minnesota for Marriage allow this to continue for days after they had seen and heard the presentation? Why are they continuing to stand by any portion of such an appalling comparison that was made? Why have we yet to hear an apology from the campaign communications director or from the faith leader of Minnesotans for Marriage? Does Minnesota for Marriage stand by these comments? What did they know about the presentation? Did they do anything to stop the presentation before it became public yesterday? These are all serious questions, and they need answers. Not only are their comparisons reprehensible and offensive, they're incredibly misleading, and they are incredibly deceptive. Minnesota deserves a better campaign than this. Minnesota deserves a better conversation than this. I'd like to introduce Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman to speak.
Thank you, Pastor Stevensen, and thank you all for joining us. We are an interfaith group standing here. I am Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman, the senior rabbi of Temple Israel in Minneapolis. And it's hard for me to fully explain how hurtful these comments are to my community and also to the wider religious community, Minnesotans of faith. We are shocked at the misuse of Hitler and the Nazi regime in this time in our state's history. I have to say, as the Jewish community, this comparison is never to be used in any other situation other than speaking about what happened in World War II. This particular issue is important for our community, and we have a long history of support for all people. For in Leviticus it says, V'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. That means we include everyone in a circle of faith and community in the Jewish community. It is the golden rule where we treat others as we would want to be treated. It is a basic individual and religious value. And so comparing our deeply held religious beliefs to the genocide committed to our people by Adolf Hitler in Germany and the Nazis is not only hurtful, but it stops any civil discourse engaged in our state. The question we face as voters on Election Day is simple. Will we as a state use our Constitution to permanently limit freedom of same-sex couples to marry in Minnesota? In my sanctuary and in sanctuaries throughout this city, we have families who gather together in worship. We want to support all families at all times and protect all children, that they know their families are loved and supported. I urge all Minnesotans, whether people of faith or those who choose not, to remain committed to a positive and honest and respectful conversation in the 2 weeks leading up to the election about what marriage means, about what love and devotion is all about. Those are the conversations we must have. And placing such a comparison that we've heard over these days, that only adds fuel to a fire that is unacceptable and unnecessary. So I ask that there is an apology. As a rabbi, as a spiritual leader, when someone or a community is hurt, the response is not to be defensive. The response is an honest apology. There's an apology needed to all Minnesotans, but an apology especially to the Jewish community at this time. Thank you.
Have any of you been in contact with Pastor Brandon at all since this came about, and any response from him whatsoever? We haven't received anything.
We have not received any response from Pastor Brandon.
Have you tried to reach out to him?
I personally have not.
Is that who you would like the apology from, or are you, yes?
Well, I think Pastor Brandon is the one whose presentation we're talking about, but of course the presentation comes from the campaign itself. So campaigns have communication directors, they have executive directors. This comes from the center of the campaign.
Do you believe that Pastor Brandon and the campaign actually believes the analogies that they insinuated, or that they're doing it to win an election?
This is what we're here to ask. Do they actually believe what they said, or are they doing it to win an election?
Rabbi Zimmerman, when you heard exactly what was said, I mean, what was your reaction to when he made the comparison to Nazi Germany? What was your reaction to it?
Well, the other part of this is that he had two photos up on a screen. One of Adolf Hitler, and the second of a photograph that is very well known within the Jewish community and throughout the world, Elie Wiesel and his father in Auschwitz on a wooden plank, a 3-story wooden bed that people slept in. And so the power of those photos was chilling for me. Whatever his words were made more powerful by those photographs. And I was in shock, I have to say, trying to understand the logic that got him to that at all. It really was not possible.
Once there is an apology, or if there is an apology, what happens afterwards? Do you forgiveness? What happens?
Of course, forgiveness. Of course, we move on. We have 13 days to go before there's an election in this state. At Minnesotans United for All Families, we're going to continue the path that we've been on for the last year, which is to be in conversation with people in Minnesota about one simple thing: shall the freedom to be married be limited so that gay and lesbian people cannot participate in that union? That's the one thing that we want to talk about. That's the one thing that this amendment is about, and it's the only thing that the other campaign should be talking about at this point.
So do you feel that, because Minnesota for Marriage said that there was an apology issue, do you feel they're lying then, that there was no apology issue?
You mean because they had some staff
They say
person?
that they can't provide any proof that there was an apology issue, but they say there was one issue. So are you saying that they're lying?
I'm saying that we haven't received an apology.
And I could just say, from the Jewish tradition, it is clear that we can't ask for an apology from God or anyone else without going in front of the person we have hurt and asked for an apology face to face, panim el panim. It is that sense that that must happen first.
So it doesn't count anyway?
What?
If there is an apology out there, it doesn't count if it hasn't gotten to you guys?
So let me just be clear. I'm not aware of anyone who has received an apology.